This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey, everyone. This is going to be a conversation that I think is super important. I haven't had one of these for a while. So for those of you who've been following the show, you may or may not know, my background actually started in the world of employee wellness, worksite well-being. And once in a while, I get to still have a conversation in that space because really the health of the organizations where we work is inextricably interconnected to our individual health and well-being, and particularly our relationship with our leader. And so I was actually really excited to have this conversation with Dr. Rich Safir. He is a medical doctor and he is the chief medical director of employee health and well-being at Johns Hopkins. But he's representing himself and he's got a new book out called The Cure for the Common Company, which is a well-being prescription for a happier, healthier, and more resilient workforce. And he really geared it towards HR and other leaders to really help create a blueprint of how do we go about things differently and how do we have a culture blueprint that really helps us rethink our role when it comes to well-being and not putting the onus just on the individual. And I think as individuals listening to this, you might get some insights or some reaffirmations for yourself as well. And we have a really good conversation about the formal leader's role or manager's role when it comes to stress. At the end, you are going to want to listen for the very last question when I ask him what behavior he would like leaders to practice to have more human workplaces. He actually gives a really, really great practice that we could do, which I was just like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that because it is a source of calm, and calm is a leadership superpower. So you're going to want to take a listen for that. He talks about 6 elements of a cultural blueprint. There's just some really good nuggets along with some really good common sense things that I think we forget about or we get astray from. And we know that our well-being is hugely important. This episode is launching in January, which is, New Year's resolution time and heightened focus on well-being. And so I just think it's very timely, and I hope you find value in it. Well, Rich, I am really excited to have this conversation with you because it's been a hot minute, actually, since I've gone back to my worksite wellness and worksite well-being roots on this podcast. I spent the first 20 years of my career in that space, and I don't know, I realized that what we were doing fundamentally wasn't working. And I know you talk about this in the work that you were doing and wanted to shift gears. And so much has evolved in the last many, many years, especially I would say the last few years. And while there's a lot of good evolution, there's still a lot of junk and crap and, I don't know, misinformation and myths and well-intended but bad approaches that are out there. And I just call it a lot of stuck practices. And so I just think that well-being is such a hot topic, and I'm just excited to have this conversation and let's talk about what's working and what's not. So before we dive into all of that, I think it's important. You're a medical doctor. You work at Johns Hopkins. I know that you're not representing that here, but you've got a really rich background. And talk to me from your lens and your background. What got you into caring about well-being at the workplace? Because I think it's helpful and it shapes your approach in the conversation we're going to have today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rosie, I'm so glad that you have 20 years of experience in my current stomping ground, because I think that obviously gives you some insight that perhaps some other hosts don't have. So great to be here. Yeah, it's not like I grew up thinking I was going to do this job. I, went to medical school, and when I finished my residency, I thought I was going to be a doctor in a suburban practice for 30 years and see my patients grow old, but I really only made it a year before I got frustrated. I finished my training during the HMO heyday, and I was seeing patients every 15 minutes. It became pretty clear that there wasn't a lot I could do in 15 minutes other than prescribe a medicine or order a test. It wasn't enough time to help my patients truly understand the root cause of their illness. And by the end of year 2, I realized, I'm roaming in and out of rooms every 15 minutes, and my patients are running back to work. And they're at work for almost 2,000 hours a year. That's where I need to be. If I could just get a job in a big company, I could be impacting a large number of people all year long, not just for 15 minutes.
I love that. I love it. Well, and yeah, we spend so much of our lives at work. And so with impacting at the workplace, one of the things that you talk about in your book, and one of the reasons I got so frustrated in the industry is there is so much focus on do these programs individual and get better, right? Or we call it the wellness or else, piggybacking off of Al Lewis, but pry, poke, prod, and punish. And let's just, force people into these programs that we could go on a whole other tangent about that, but it's all the onus on the individual of here. You need to go to the doctor and fix yourself. You need to do this. You need to change this behavior, which we know doesn't work because your leader, your culture, all these other things have such a huge impact. So you talk about how well-being is a team sport. Say more about that.
Yeah, I can understand why you were frustrated, Rosie. It's a tough field. I mean, we've made a lot of progress, but it's still tough. Just think about your own well being journey. And you don't have to disclose any of your own private information, but for our listeners, think about your own well being journey. If you could have already created that habit of getting enough fruits and vegetables during that day, that habit of taking enough steps, you probably would have done it already. And so just because your employer is creating a steps challenge doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to have that habit of moving throughout the day. So we need to rethink, and the spirit of your commentary, that it is not all on us as individuals, because we don't live alone. We don't work alone. We live with other people in our, either within the physical space of our apartment, our townhome, whatever it is, and we work with other people, or we're with people in the community, and the people around us impact our healthy habits and our thought processes. You said it. We don't know that we want to go down which tangent, and I'll keep it at that in case you want to pursue it.
Well, I think it is so important because so often I would just say we blame the individual rather than looking at we refer to it in our work as the inextricable interconnectedness of the health and well-being of individuals and the health and well-being of the organizations where they work. And we call it the fusion, but they're super interconnected. And I think so often either an organization doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because they believe that well-being is a personal journey and it's none of my business. And as a leader, I don't want to ask about it. I don't want to get too personal. I don't want to open up a can of worms. I don't know what to say, whatever it might be, whatever narrative they have around why we don't want to do that. But on an individual level, they might be saying, oh my gosh, you're giving me a steps challenge, or you're messing around with my insurance premium, or you're doing XYZ. Meanwhile, the workload is unsustainable. My boss treats me like crap. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. We don't live the values. And so there's frustration and well-intended benefits and programs and resources that are meant to enhance the employee experience end up having an unintended consequence of actually pissing people off and eroding the employee experience. And I don't think we realize it.
Yeah, I mean, it may piss some people off, but I don't want to completely throw out, throw out the baby with the bathwater, I think. I never really liked that expression because it's kind of yucky to think about it that way. But there are some programs and benefits that are helpful to some people. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are some employees who feel frustrated. Even, I think you use pissed off by what their employer's doing. But mostly, people are probably in the middle. They're unaffected. They're not impacted one way or the other. And that's probably not good enough if we expect to see a substantial change. I think that some employers, want to do the right thing, but maybe it's that it's a personal issue and they're afraid of treading in that area. But possibly it's more like they don't know what to do because they've tried approaches before and they haven't worked. And, let's face it, if you're spending money and resources for a decade and you're not seeing change, you probably would throw your hands up. Why would you throw more money at it? I think that leaders need to reimagine the approach and embrace that this is not just an individual journey, but that this is an entire organization's journey. And that, yes, the circumstances in which people come to work and the circumstances in which they work impact their health and well-being.
So let's go there because in your book you talk about. I love that you talk about culture and you also talk about subcultures because culture is ultimately experienced at that local team level. And yes, our coworkers can influence our culture, but the formal people leaders have the largest influence over those subcultures for sure. And you talk about like, hey, as a leader, we have to care about this. So, and you do in your book talk about that leadership's role in well-being, which so many formal leaders. I use that because we don't believe leadership is about a title or role, but for those that are listening that have that formal leadership responsibility, might be thinking, what do you mean well-being is part of my responsibility or well-being is part of what I need to be thinking about or the conversations I need to be having as a leader? Talk to me about what you've experienced and also how you are implementing that or how you are equipping leaders to integrate well-being into how they lead others.
Yeah, sure. We're going to go down the culture path. And for those of you who are tired of hearing the word culture, don't turn it off, because what I have found is that most people don't know what that means because it's often not defined. So I'm going to start with the definition. The definition of culture is the shared behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes of a group of people. The shared behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes of a group of people. And in this case, it's the group of people either on a work team or across the entire organization. And as a leader, whether it's a team, department, division, the entire organization, you have an opportunity to shape those behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes, just like you shape business decisions and business outcomes. You don't have to be afraid of it. You don't have to be intimidated by it because there is a plan. There is a blueprint that you could follow if you chose to. And yes, the reason why you want to embrace this responsibility as a leader is that when you can create conditions that are more supportive of your team's health and well-being, then they're going to be more engaged with their job. They're going to perform better. They're going to feel better about working with you, which means they're going to stay longer. They're going to be more loyal. I mean, let me just imagine, it doesn't happen overnight, but think about the path that you're starting and creating. And in a few months, you start to see the changes. And in a year, the people on your team are your best marketing tool for recruiting future employees.
100%. Well, and I love that you position it that way because for people who might have had a lackluster experience with employee well-being or wellness because it didn't get whatever results they were hoping, or for people who are still on the argument of, well, this is supposed to save us money on our health insurance, rather than looking at that investing in employee well-being to the point that they have the attitude and beliefs and mindset that I matter, that I care, that this work is purposeful, that I belong, that my leader cares about me, that my team member has my back. It becomes part of the cultural brand. It becomes part of the, employee experience platform, if you will, of this is how we treat people and how we take care of people. It's not this extra tangential thing that we want you to do to jump through hoops to save money. This is about fundamentally how we treat one another and care for you as a whole person. And I think that's a very different way. Like we actually suggest to organizations that you start thinking about well-being as a core part of your people development, aka leadership development strategy, and extrapolate it from the benefits department altogether, because that's not where it resides, because it is about that experience on that team. I don't know, what are your thoughts or what have you experienced in your work?
Well, first of all, if you're spending a lot of money, you might be doing this wrong. And if you're entirely outsourcing this area, you're definitely doing it wrong. Because there's no way that someone from the outside of your company can understand the culture inside your company as well as you do. So this responsibility is everybody's. It's not just the wellness person's responsibility. Actually, it won't work if it's just the wellness person's responsibility. Because as you said, or as you alluded to, Rosie, you want to make this function more central to the business effort. You have to make it more central to the business effort. This is the crux of the missing piece. is getting every leader involved with creating a well-being culture, not just on their own team, but across the entire organization. Now, it is true that you are much more likely to be successful if you have a qualified professional within your organization who understands the material like you or I do, Rosie. However, not every company is large enough to employ that person, which is why there are now books and other resources where you can start to learn from. And they're really, in my opinion, there's no reason why leaders need to wait any longer.
Yeah. So let's talk about that because in your book, you present a blueprint. And I was smiling I have to tell you, I was smiling as I read it because we put our first book out. It's 10 years ago this month. And we have a blueprint. It's a 7-step blueprint of how to create. And it came off of people like, how do we do what you're doing? Because I was in a consulting role and here you go, like, here, give it away. And I like the way you talk about it being a blueprint, which is a similar language we use in that no two companies are alike. Therefore, right, it's like take this and then how do you make it your own? So can you walk us through what are the elements of that blueprint that people are listening can either go, hey, yay, we're doing that. We're on the right track. Or, oh, I didn't think about that. This is something that we want to really look at in our blueprint from a culture well-being standpoint. Again, in the spirit of that when your culture supports well-being in an effective way, when your culture is thriving, it's a win-win, right? The culture and the health of your organization is inextricably interconnected to the individuals that work there and vice versa. And so how can we stop looking at them in a silo and looking at from a cultural standpoint is really where that integration happens. So walk us through your blueprint, please.
Sure. We position it as 6 building blocks. And none of the building blocks is more important than the other. It just so happens I can't say them all at once. So whatever order they come out in, I don't want you to think that the first one's more important than the last. I'll also say that these building blocks work best when they overlap, when you use them together. If you want to remember the 6 building blocks, then knowing the phrase plan for success might be helpful. The P in plan is for peer support. The L is for leadership engagement. The N in plan is for norms. Skip the word for and go to the word success. The S in success is for shared values. The 2 C's are for culture connection points. And then the last S is for social climate. One of those building blocks is leadership engagement. You need leaders to help execute on all of those, but it's not just leaders who are going to make this successful.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the leader's role, because we do know that, again, I'm going to speak to formal leaders. So those people who are listening that don't have a formal leadership role, be thinking about, yes, you influence change. How can you have a conversation with your formal leader, perhaps? And if you're listening, you are a formal leader. You do play the largest role in the employee experience and culture. And you call that out in your book. It's one of obviously the pieces of your blueprint that leaders need to be able to support well-being. But as going back to earlier, so many either think it's not their place, they don't know how, because let's be honest, it's not something that's taught in most like leadership curriculum. And you have embedded well-being skills into new manager orientation at Johns Hopkins. Can you give some examples of how you're equipping leaders? Like, let's make it tangible for them and give people some things that they could go back and try.
Yeah, we have a class called managing the stress of the employees, or the role of the manager in managing employee stress. And it touches on a few basic ideas. One is that the manager's stress level impacts the stress level of the people on the team. And we need to be conscious of the mood we're in because it's going to impact all the people around us and disproportionately bigger impact on those people who we lead. Number 2, you're a role model. And so if you're practicing healthy behaviors and having healthy attitudes and interactions during the day, that's going to foster the people on your team to do the same. And by definition, by having that being a role model, number 3 is self-care. meaning you can't be the best leader that you want to be if you're coming into work tired, if you haven't been exercising, if you're choosing unhealthy foods that put you to sleep after lunch. And there's other examples, Rosie, but these are very basic things that aren't rocket science, but nobody has given leaders permission to do this. And no one's kind of just been so crystal clear. We're not asking leaders to ask their employees personal information. Do not do that. Do not ask people on your team how many fruits and veggies they ate yesterday. But what you may want to do, instead of bringing in a plate of donuts to the team meeting, how about a bowl of clementines? Because there are some people on the team who have certain health conditions that those donuts are making it worse. And they want to make healthy food choices, but you're making it harder for them. It doesn't have to be rocket science, Rosie.
And so what are some other examples besides, the movement and exercise? And let's say people are virtual teams, so they're not going into an office. What are some of the other practices or ways that leaders can inquire about or actively show support for people's well-being?
Sure. Well, I mean, Gallup research indicates that the most impactful agenda item that a leader can have to help a person on their team feel cared about is one 10 to 15 minute meaningful conversation every week with each person who reports to them. Something that's not specifically work only, but rather something a little bit more personal about family life or activities outside of work to help make that connection beyond the work that needs to be done. And that's not difficult if you slow down and just schedule that 15-minute call. Let's say that's not the first place you want to start. It's understandable. It might be too big of a deviation from where you currently are. How about not sending emails to people on your team outside of normal business hours? And then when someone does send you an email outside of business hours, how about just a very calm, neutral message? Hey, noticed that you sent me an email last night. I'm glad you like your job, but I'd really want you to get some rest in the night at night and sleep well. So why don't you pick a time like 5 or 6 to stop emailing, because I think you're going to come to work the next day more effective. That's a very gentle way. It has nothing to do with their health other than saying, I want you to get a good night's sleep. I don't think that's too risky. It's really focused on the work and how to be more effective. And it avoids putting you in a position playing doctor in the workplace.
I love that. And you think about even setting the tone of, we have so many clients that there is an underlying culture, I would say in general, but particularly among leadership. And it's worse the higher up in the hierarchy of the organization, where either they aren't allowed to set an out of office message when they're gone. And with that, I've actually worked with some of the leaders to have a workaround. Okay, fine. If you're not allowed, but if you're not allowed, because I'm not trying to get people fired or, how can we do a workaround? Can you proactively reach out to the people you work the closest with and let them know, hey, I'm really going to try to unplug for a long weekend with my family unless it's urgent. So they know, and you're kind of, it gives you a buffer, but at least explicitly stating it. Or I've seen people who they will put an out of office message, but then they're responding while they're gone. Well, again, if you're in a leadership role, that sends a undercurrent to people that will then, therefore you also can't unplug. And I don't think we recognize that as much by all means.
Well, first of all, the literature supports that the well-being of leaders is worse than the front line. The other thing, what you're describing is potentially you're describing a norm, a workplace norm, where employees email after hours or on weekends. Norms is one of the 6 building blocks. Norms are the accepted behavior of a group of people. It's acceptable. It's maybe even expected for leaders to not turn their out of office message on and to keep emailing when they really should be separating from work. Norms are very difficult to break. It's almost like you're swimming upstream. And if you're a leader who wants to make a difference in the health and well-being of those you lead, or maybe even your peers, then you have to get out of line. You have to swim the other way upstream instead of with the current. It can be difficult and your arms might get really tired. But if you don't, you're going to keep swimming towards that waterfall where the current's going, and you will crash and burn eventually. And if it's not you, you might ruin a marriage, you might ruin a relationship with a friend, a kid. So there are consequences to keeping, just accepting the norm of your workplace.
100%. And you know what that got me thinking is going back to that culture is not the wellness person's responsibility. We always say, it's not the CEO's responsibility. It's not HR's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. And like every single one of us every day can choose to either show up as a culture contributor or a culture contaminator. And if I have formal leadership role, I've got to be very cognizant of the weight of my actions, my words, etc. And I can think about in the past before we started our company Saleo Partners of working with in various organizations in leadership roles, and like my team would talk about like they feel like they were in a protective bubble versus the other teams within the organization that they are like stressed and burnt out because it was kind of like I'm taking a hit from my leader to say no, unplug, no, don't answer that, no, I whatever, because I knew probably because of my background, but I'm like, you're not good to anybody if you're depleted. You're not good to anybody if you're falling apart. And it does make a difference. So you can have people that are like pockets within an organization that is known to have a pretty cutthroat, difficult culture. And you're like, well, why is that group or that division or that team doing so well? I would bet you it's because the leaders are being that salmon swimming upstream and kind of forming that subculture that is the deviation of the norm that actually is more human and allows for people to thrive. And so I think that leaders that think that they can't make that difference in this bigger microcosm, that I think we sell ourselves short.
Right. Rosie, a few minutes ago, you asked me about, well, what can leaders do? And, you guys are doing some training of new managers. We actually created something called the 10-minute well-being tips for managers. These are literally 10-minute sessions that we delivered live and then had, whoever was interested stay on for 15 or 20 for Q&A. They're really basic items that you wouldn't think of as well-being issues, but like setting priorities, setting boundaries. These are very much intertwined with the well-being of the people you lead. And most leaders don't recognize not only are they good for business, but they're good for health and well-being. And so, try to make these items digestible and give concrete steps for whatever skills or habits you're trying to instill in your managers so that they can start to adopt them and move their culture in a more human, healthy, and emotionally healthy direction.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I've actually been having this conversation recently with some of our clients where in this chaotic world, when people try to use the old like Johari window of, urgent and important, and almost everything is falling in the quadrant of urgent and important. And you have not just individual employees, but leaders that are like, we have 100 priorities. Well, no, like, right. And then you wonder, going back to stress, right? That managing your stress. And so, one of the things that we've been doing for, oh gosh, I want to say the past year and a half, maybe going on 2 years internally on our team, and that we've given where it makes sense to some of our clients that has truly been a game changer is simplifying that every Monday we have a huddle to sync up on the week and just, anything we need to be aware of and what's our priorities. And we use the ball metaphor of glass ball, wood ball, rubber ball. Glass balls, if you drop them, devastating consequences, right? Like you're not going to come back from it. Wood balls, they're going to be a little scuffed, but probably recoverable. And rubber have bounce. Like, no, the world isn't going to end. Like they're almost the nice to have. And so often, we look at this to-do list and it's, oh my gosh, I have to get it all done. And what we do every Monday is we look at the list of the week and we look at what we have going on. And even like with some of my team members, they've started putting in their calendar, is this glass, is this wood, or is this rubber? And we say we only have 2 glass balls every single day and every single week. Client deliverables, because that's the core of what we do, is always a glass ball, and self-care, well-being. And for us, we have self-care broadly. That's certainly taking care of yourself, but it could be, you're dealing with an aging parent, you got a spouse going through something, whatever. Like it's really like it. That's kind of our code for well-being is if those hands down are glass balls and everything else will negotiate. And that has been super, super helpful when I notice my team getting stressed on about something. I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. Nope, that is rubber this week. I get it was wood last week. This week, that's a rubber ball. And I don't know. So I would just share that of like something super, super simple when you think about, oh, I don't want to get in their personal life, but even just like, here you go.
Yeah, I have a recurring appointment on my calendar every morning. It says priorities. And underneath it, I have my 5 priorities for the year. And it's the same thing every day just to keep reminding me to stay focused. It helps me say no more easily. It helps me ask my boss for help on my priorities if I get something added to my plate. And I regularly share this and remind the folks on our team that they should be doing the same because I want our team to be healthy and sharp and focused and energetic and want to show up to work. And it's important to me as a leader to help them set those boundaries so that they do come back and they do continue to help our team excel.
I love that. I think any kind of deliberate practice where we're being thoughtful about it, because they can change from week to week. I mean, you can have them. But if we're not talking about that, you'd be amazed at how many people you think, oh, it's easy to prioritize, but people struggle with it. I mean, I even struggle with it sometimes, and I have to go, nope, this is a glass ball this week. I need to give myself grace if I don't get XYZ done because that was a rubber ball this week, or that was a wood ball this week, or whatever it is. And again, whatever your system is, but that's just what we use. That is helpful. All right. So since I've been in the field for quite a hot bit, I'm curious about something. So as I read your book, and I did get through most of it, by the way. So we're going to put a link in the show notes, Cure for the Common Company. But I'm curious because what I used to do a lot of speaking at wellness conferences. I kind of got away from it because our focus sort of realizing that if you don't focus on culture and you don't focus on leadership, and we use like a pyramid analogy, that's like the base of the pyramid, that all the well-being stuff that is closer to the top of the pyramid just doesn't work, doesn't stick. And so that's kind of how my world evolved with the work that we do. But I was curious because there's two things that I noticed that were missing in your book, and I'm curious if it was just intentional. I just want to have a little debate with you and like push back on me if you're open to it, because I'm like, oh, I get to geek out with somebody. So one is, so when you were talking in your book about health at the organizational level, and you use your definition of culture, we also, when we talk about culture, when we're talking about at the workplace, we also very diligently always reference Dr. Edgar Schein's work because he was the guru of organizational culture. And one of the ways that he talks about it is he says that it goes beyond like the norms of how we do things around here, but that culture is the underlying, hidden, taken for granted, unconscious beliefs, attitudes, values. So he really talks about it more at the mindset level that fundamentally shape then the norms, the behaviors, how we do things. And that if we're going to change culture, the worst way to go about it is trying to change culture, but to really first look at leadership practices, but looking at the mindset. And I guess where I'm going is a lot of the stuff that gets talked about a lot in the wellness industry and even about norms is about behaviors like do this. And we're even having this conversation. But what we have found is unless you also do the work to get at that mindset of people and how do you shift the mindset that guides their behaviors, that it sometimes misses a stickiness factor. And I'm curious on your thoughts of where mindset fits into all of this.
Well, first, you introduced this thought leader as a guru. So I don't want to fight with a guru, but I will tell you that this mindset, this unconscious force, I think is represented through skills such as becoming a better listener and showing appreciation, which are mentioned in the book. I mean, there's so many different skills that are mentioned in the social climate chapter that contribute to this mindset. I mean, it's only a habit when you're thinking about it. And once you've been doing it so long and so regularly, it's really more of the way you do business around here. And it becomes more subconscious. I don't know about unconscious, but subconscious. And yes, so we're in agreement on that being an important element. I think where we differ is you said that you hadn't read the whole book yet. I'm not sure if you got to the social climate chapter, but
I skimmed it.
So I think you'll find that there are many elements in that chapter and others which help set the stage for leaders in the entire organization to be engaging in practices that they're just not thinking about because it's become the norm. There's that word again. If everybody is not listening 1 year to each other, that's causing a lot of miscommunication and resentment and all that stuff. And 3 years from now, everybody is listening and it's causing better collaboration and people feeling more heard and greater trust. And if people aren't thinking about how we got that way, that's, a subconscious element of the culture.
So speaking of the social climate, I mean, there was a few different parts in the book where you talk about that willpower isn't enough, which I absolutely agree. And I think we look at it differently, but you talk about willpower isn't enough and then like the social support. So talk about how that social support, social climate, in your view, fills that gap or makes up for where willpower isn't enough to get us wherever we're trying to go.
Well, everybody who's listening has probably tried the willpower approach at least once. And if you haven't, I've probably taken your turn for you. And it doesn't usually turn out well because there's so many forces around you that are pushing you in the opposite direction of where you want to go. Some of it's about social climate. So, there's three core elements that I call out in the social climate chapter. It's being on a team and in a workplace where there's a positive outlook, positive language, cup half full thinking. And the second is the sense of belonging, like you like to be part of this team and you're accepted as part of this team. And then sharing goals and a vision, like everyone's rowing together. And then there's all these pieces that you need to have in place in order to get this good social climate. And certainly when you're in a supportive environment that feels good, that you want to go to work, that you're happy to be amongst them, that makes it easier for you to ask for help for some healthy habit that you're trying to achieve or getting rid of an unhealthy habit. But that's not the only building block that contributes to our individual success. In fact, I'd say the other building blocks do the same work just as well, but in a different way. So, for example, peer support. There's lots of data to show that when you're trying to quit smoking, if you quit with another smoker, you're 50% more likely to succeed. If you're trying to lose weight and you quit with a group of 3 or 4 others, you're much more likely to succeed, not only keep the weight off longer, but keep more weight off. The list goes on and on. So, yeah, willpower is not an effective strategy. It's very rare that it works. And there's many different ways we can shape our well-being culture to make it easier for people to succeed on building healthy habits and getting rid of unhealthy ones.
And so to build on that, I'm curious, are you familiar with, speaking about like willpower not being enough, are you familiar with Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy's work?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm going to give you one to look up in the listeners. So they're from Harvard, and Bob Keegan is well known for his theories of adult development. But they wrote a book, gosh, over 10 years ago by now, more than that, called "Immunity to Change." And the reason I'm asking this is, and actually, I think a year or two ago during COVID, Brene Brown had Lisa Leahy on her podcast for a 2-part series, and Lisa kind of walked Brene through this process. And I share that because I trained with them, and use their methodology a lot. And where I'm going with this is that what they have found is that we actually all have what they call our psychological immune system. So just like our physical immune system is trying to protect us right from disease and infection, but it can go haywire. Someone has an autoimmune disorder, the body's attacking itself as an example that people might resonate who are listening. But on the psychological level, and you referenced Dr. David Rock's like scarf model in your book and stuff. So we have these threat and reward triggers in our brain. Well, when those get activated, we have a psychological immune system that formed really in the early years, in those imprint kind of years of our life, that create a narrative for us around like what's safe and what's not. And this immune system, what'll happen is we will have a goal that we want to work on. And a lot of well-being goals fall in the realm of adaptive challenges versus technical, where we can't just will ourselves to do it. And they talk about that's like having one foot on the gas, and that as much as we're motivated and we want to change and we might have all the social support around us, we've got this underlying immune system that slams one foot on the brake that says, no, 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 no. Like, because if I set boundaries, then I'm going to be perceived as selfish. Or if I do this, I'm not going to be in control, or people might not like me. And it's not happening at that conscious level. It's that subconscious level that's working against us. And until we understand these like underlying motivations that are actually inadvertently working against us, we don't make progress on these goals. And what we find a lot in the work that we've done is that there's a combination of, you want to have the social support and you want to have the peer network. But if someone has a fundamental underlying psychological immune system that is why they can't ask for support or whatever it might be, then they're shooting themselves in the foot. And so we always look at both. Like, how do you help people identify that mindset or where they might have that immune system at play? And you can't take a changed person and put them into an unchanged environment and expect it to be different. So you do also need the social support. So I guess when I was going at the mindset stuff, I was curious if you were familiar with their work, because we have found so many leaders we work with have goals around well-being. They want to have better boundaries. They want to, tend to the things that matter to them. And all of the different things that they've tried, no matter what, don't work until they address and heal that immune system. And then suddenly they're setting better boundaries. And then they're actually like not ignoring their workout times or their morning meditation practice or unplugging from work. So I'm just curious of how you see that fitting in.
Well, these system changes can produce great results, but they're not by themselves the sole approach. We can't go from only asking the individual to work on their health and well-being to only asking the organization to work on their health and well-being. It sounds like a health coach or an executive coach would be very helpful for different circumstances like the ones you just mentioned. I know personally that I had an executive coach help me a couple of times, and an industrial psychologist helped me like more than a decade ago. And so I don't know that the company can afford an executive coach or an industrial psychologist for each employee, but there's probably some compromise. Yeah, we have to have individual resources as well if the company can afford that line item in their budget.
Love it. Yeah, they're interconnected. Yeah, I was just curious if you were familiar with their work at all. I was like, I wonder if he is. So there we go. So check it out. You might find interesting. Well, so speaking of mindsets and whatnot, one of the things that I've learned, as I've alluded to in our work over the years, is no matter how much coaching someone's had and or worked with a psychologist, or how much work we've done on ourselves, or how many degrees we have, that it kind of is in our human nature to tell ourselves self-limiting stories that get in our own way from time to time. And one of the things we like to do on the show is normalize that for our guests when they think, oh my gosh, here we have, Rich is an MD and he does all this work, but, you're a human being as well. So what I would love, in the spirit of well-being and openness and transparency, Rich, if you would share, what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can still show up as a leader in your life and have the impact you want to have?
Rosie, I listened to a few episodes of your show, and I've heard you ask this question in pretty much, similar language. And I thought about it coming into the recording today, because I was pretty sure you were going to ask it. And, I think that there were some self-limiting self-talk earlier in my career, but I want to give a little twist to the question. And that twist is actually about what it's like at this stage in my career, and how do I limit purposefully what I'm doing? Like, what kind of language can I use to actually limit myself? Because, Rosie, my bigger problem is not that I have self-limiting talk, it's that I don't limit myself enough. And I've gotten much better at saying no. And the reason why I've been able to get much better at saying no. So this is one of the things that executive coach I was mentioning to you helped me with a couple of years ago, which is I've gotten to a place in my career where I can say that I've done enough and I am enough. And I'm very grateful that I've arrived, because it's taken some of the pressure that I was putting on myself to do more, to be more successful, be more effective. And it took a toll on my well-being, getting to where I am today. And now it's time for me to catch up and take care of myself while still taking care of the 40,000 employees at Johns Hopkins Medicine.
I love that. I love that you had that limits and boundaries. They are good. They are a friend.
Yes, they are. They're definitely our friend.
All right. Well, are you ready for quick questions?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is?
Being yourself.
Yes. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
I let somebody else lead.
Nice. I like that. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
That I was in musicals when I was in middle and high school.
What was your favorite musical to be in?
So I had the lead male character in my senior year of high school in The Sound of Music, which meant I was the Baron von Trapp.
No way. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. So all the way to the point where I wore leather green lederhosen.
So you can sing Edelweiss is what you're trying to say.
I used to be able to sing Edelweiss. That is correct.
I love that. That is amazing. What is something you can't live without?
My wife.
She'll be happy to hear that. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
I feel very grateful. Over the years, I've developed a pretty good gratitude practice, which I never really thought was a gratitude practice until it became in vogue to promote gratitude practices. So I think because I'm genuinely grateful for where I've come from and where I've come to, it really helps me put life into perspective.
Nice. Well, and speaking of a gratitude practice, what are you grateful for right now?
Well, I'm grateful that you had me here with you today, Rosie Ward.
Well, I'm grateful for you, Rich Saphir.
I really appreciate the work you're doing. Really, it's really important that you're out there helping these organizations find a better path, because the people you're working with are influencing hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. And that's the way we're collectively making a difference.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, and I'm glad that I think it's, I always say, well, yes, I'm not in the world of worksite well-being anymore, but what I'm doing is getting more at the root of it. So it's still it's not like, oh, I've abandoned it. I'm trying to do it a different way, and you're doing it in your way. And I think we just need to keep having these conversations because there's so much good intention out there and so many professionals that are trying to make a difference in this space. Again, very well intended. And sometimes we're getting bad information, or we just don't know what to do, or we're lost. And so I think having blueprints and having guides and having conversations of, the world's changed and maybe our approach needs to change. I think it's so important. So I'm grateful for that. So I have a closing question. If you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that will create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
I would ask every leader to spend 3 minutes at the end of every hour, or 3 minutes at the beginning of every hour, and do a breathing practice. Not just one that you're making up, but one that you've been taught by a qualified professional that will help calm your mind and lower your stress level. It'll be good for you as well as the people that you're leading. And it's not just about your well-being and the well-being of those you lead. It's about your ability to be an effective leader and help your team and your organization even more so than you currently do.
I love that because breath is a source of calm and calm is a leadership superpower. And I've never thought of starting every hour with breath practice. So I'm going to take that from you. So thank you for that. Well, much, much gratitude. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. And thank you for being with us today.
Oh, well, thank you, Rose. I'm not the best marketer, but I do want to give a plug for A Cure for the Common Company. I did write it for leaders and HR professionals specifically because most of the people in those fields have not had training on how to lead a team and support their health and well-being. I'm glad you're finding it enjoyable, Rosie, and I think your listeners will find it helpful as well.
Absolutely. We will include it in the show notes so people go get the link and go get the book.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.